So we begin with a nod to our Francophone African friends. That was the Korea-produced video previewing the Korea-Africa initiative. So good afternoon in Africa, good evening in Asia, good morning here in the United States, and welcome to the 5th Africa-US Forum for 2024, our 17th altogether. This is a preview of the historic Korea-Africa initiative that'll be launched next month in Seoul. These monthly programs feature speakers from around the African continent, from here in Washington, D.C., and this month from Korea. This forum is on the record and is being recorded. Video will be available on demand later on the USC Africa US website, and we'll put that into chat for those of you who don't know the URL. You can find videos of all these forums and the schedule, all of our forums going through December of this year. Our next forum will be Monday, June 24th at this same time, and the topic will be Perspectives from Africa on the Future of International Population and Development Policy. And that will introduce a new partner here on this end of the partnership, which is the USC Keck School of Medicine. And for those of you who are here for lunch as well today with the Deputy Secretary of State, she advised us over the weekend that she has been called away from Washington, and so that event has been postponed. We have there's a famous joke which ends with a pastor saying there's a leaf missing. Anyway, details on these events will be published at the start of the month. These forums are presented each month by, in alphabetical order, the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Witwatersrand, and we are joined by Bob Wekesa from Johannesburg from that center. The Annenberg Center for Communication, Leadership, and Policy at the University of Southern California, represented by Judy and me. The Center for African Studies at Howard University, the Institute for African Studies at George Washington University, and the Public Diplomacy Council of America. And again, you can see a list of more detail on our website. Today, we are joined by speakers in alphabetical order. Professor Wonbin Cho, one of Korea's leading Africa experts, and thank you once again for joining us this late at night in Korea. Dr. Joana Dodoo from the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. Ambassador Ngovi Kitau, Kenya's first ambassador to the Republic of Korea. Professor Steve Sharra from Unicaf University in Malawi. And as always, we begin with the USC Annenberg inaugural Africa Fellow, and now the director of the African Center for the Study of the United States, Dr. Bob Wekesa. So Bob, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adam, and thank you, colleagues, for making time. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I think we are across 3 massive time zones, which just demonstrates the commitment to this. Very briefly, I'll mention that this Africa US Universities initiative commenced in December 2022, coinciding with the US Africa Leaders Summit. And Adam has mentioned the partners. We are in the process of expanding that so that we have multiple partners across the continent and in the US. The objective of the initiative, among others, was to provide these platforms as opportunities for us to discuss and find way forward on tackling Africa-US relations. But as it came to our realization, when you focus on Africa and the US, you certainly have to focus on Africa and other global partners, just going to demonstrate the interconnected world in which we live. And so in the past, we've had to look at Africa-US and engagement with other global powers. China has featured quite a bit. On this occasion, as mentioned, we are focusing on Africa-Korea because of the summit that is taking place on June 4 and June 5. And so the initiative basically looks to provide an opportunity for us to debate, discuss, and weigh in on some of the key issues that Africa, the youngest continent, Africa, the most promising continent, Africa, the continent on the march can do with the global powers. And so I also just wanted to mention, in addition to Adam's mentioned that videos for these events dating back to December 2022 are available, but beginning this year, we've started producing reports of these events because we found them very enriching, quite nuanced, quite detailed, very many perspectives. So we thought, in addition to the videos, we also have the written word as a point of reference. And thanks, looking forward to the discussion. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you, and we are going to begin from Asia with Professor Wonbin Cho. He is one of Korea's leading Africa experts. He has written widely on political systems, on communications, and on the nature of elections and politics in sub-Saharan Africa. So, Professor Cho, the floor is yours.
Good morning and good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I'm Wonbin Cho, and Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science at Sungkyunkwan University in Seoul, South Korea. And it is my great pleasure to meet all of you, and would like to thank you for your interest in the Korea-Africa relationship, and in particular, the upcoming Korea-Africa Summit. So as Bob and Adam mentioned, June 4th and 5th, the first Korea-Africa Summit will take place in Seoul. The inaugural Korea-Africa Summit is expected to be the largest international gathering under the current Korean administration. This reflects our government commitment to fostering a mutually beneficial and sustainable and strategic long-term partnership with Africa, aligning with Korea's vision of becoming a global pivotal state. This marks a significant step in Korea's comprehensive strategy to engaging more deeply with the Global South, reflecting the commitment to global inclusiveness and cooperation. The summit will be held under the main theme of the future we make together, shared growth, sustainabilities, and the solidarities. In terms of the shared growth, Korea seeks to strengthening economic cooperation with Africa for development and growth. And for sustainability, Korea is willing to search together with Africa for collaborative and sustainable solution to global challenges. With regard to solidarity, South Korea sees room for enhancing collaborations with Africa in multilateral fora for peace and security. The three key elements are closely intertwined, and in particular, South Korea knows better than any other country that economic growth and peace and security are inextricably related. Without sustainable peace and security, the chance of the economic growth is very real, and same for the vice versa. The 2024 Korea-Africa Summit will provide the best opportunity for Korea to accompany Africa's proactive development path based on its own experiences and expertise. Throughout the summit, the leader will engage in discussions centered on the developing win-win strategies by leveraging the respective comparative advantages of both Africa and South Korea, creating interactive opportunities that benefit both parties. The South Korea expertise in development, coupled with its unwavering commitment to aid and advanced technologies, position itself to catalyze Africa's economic growth and sustainable development. Above all, we are striving diligently to ensure a result and outcome-oriented summit. The summit will lay a solid foundation for the future where Korea and African cooperation goes beyond the world, leading to lasting prosperities and progress for both regions. Our government, since its inauguration, has been actively engaged in the effort to enhance cooperations with African countries. As I mentioned earlier, this reflects our government, the strong commitment. Having experienced the oppression and the colonizations and having overcome the leverage of war, Korean War, Korea possesses a profound understanding of the challenges and aspirations of the African nations more than any other country in the world, I think. Among the countries who already had summit with Africa, as you know, China, Japan, United States, not a single country has such a history that South Korea and Africa share. Korea overcome those obstacles and achieved remarkable growth, not solely by itself, but with the support of the international communities. Therefore, South Korea is committed to giving back to the international community, including Africa, by sharing our experience in economic growth and development. And that is the role we are seeking to play in the future that we aspire to make together with Africa. Moreover, Korea boasted the diverse arrays of the technology ranging from the traditional industries to cutting-edge innovations. This technological position our South Korea to offer tailored solutions to address the varied needs of African countries. Leveraging Korea's expertise in education and vocational training alongside Africa's abundant youth population present a significant opportunity for Africa's capacity building and skill development initiatives, empowering its youth and driving economic growth. So the Korea-Africa Summit, we are eager to share our unique and unparalleled experience with all African countries, embodying the true value of solidarity. The upcoming Korea-Africa Summit will be our government's finishing touch for the previous effort to develop the relationship with Africa, opening a new era in Korea-African cooperation. Our government has been diligently worked to significantly expand cooperation with Africa, with particular focus on equality above all else. Korea and Africa are equal partners and should benefit equally from the collaborative efforts. Drawing upon the African Union's Agenda 2063 and Korea's vision of serving as a global pivotal state, both sides, Korea and Africa, share the important values and aspirations that serve as a cornerstone for the enhancing strategic cooperations. Above all, our government stands prepared for the actively share its wealth of the experience and expertise with African countries and endeavor to become a strategic partner in facilitating the Africa's proactive stride toward a promising future. In this regard, our government pledged to double its ODA by 2030 through the tailored support mechanism aligned with the specific needs of conditions of the individual nations. South Korea aimed to accompany the African countries to take the lead in charting their own trajectories. Keeping this in mind, the Korean government is planning to set up 7 priority area cooperation with African nations, particularly in the realm of the shared growth, sustainability, and solidarity. The first one is fostering mutual growth by boosting trade and innovation. Second, addressing global challenges, including food security, global supply chains, climate change, and public health. Third, sustainable energy and infrastructure. Fourth, developing human resources, including education. And fifth, science, technology, and digital transformations. Sixth, the promoting mutual understanding and the people-to-people exchanges. The last, seventh, the achieving peace and security. So Korea-African Summit will serve as an occasion to explore the innovative solution tailored to the needs of the both sides and yield tangible result-oriented outcomes. The South Korean transition from the being an aid recipient to a donor country provide valuable insight into development processes. Korea's history offers guidance and the support based on its own developmental experience, which would in particular benefit African countries striving for self-reliant development. As a strategist partner in facilitating Africa's proactive stride toward the promising future, South Korea is planning to enlarge its financial support to Africa in various ways. South Korea was willing not only to increase the quantity, but also quality and the efficacy of its assistance to Africa. To this end, South Korean government provides tailored support to meet the needs and conditions of each African nations. So KSP, knowledge sharing program, would be the best example. The major characteristic of the program is demand-driven. All projects under the KSP are initiated by the need from partner countries. After receiving countries' application, the program selects the Korean institution that best matches the need for each project. Launched in 2004, the KSP has conducted 82 consultation projects in 16 African countries by 2022. We would like to have more projects in Africa using momentum generated by these summits. And regarding the second part of I'd like to first highlight the fact that education and vocational training were essential elements in South Korean transformations into an advanced nation. With a large youth population in African countries, there is a significant potential for synergy in human resources development. And Korea's education system and the vocational training expertise can contribute to Africa's capacity building and skill development initiatives. Over the past 30 years, the economic relationship between Korea and Africa has expanded significantly. However, there still exists a great need to further expand the absolute scales of the trade and investment. The Korean government prioritized on the investment in Africa, first and foremost to establish conducive environment for Korean companies to collaborate seamlessly with their African partners. Our government prioritized extending support in particular to Korean companies venturing abroad and recognizing their pivotal role in enhancing the bilateral economic ties. In line with this, the Korean government focused on the bolstering institutional framework, including the expand of the Economic Partnership Agreement, EPAs, and Trade and Investment Promotion Frameworks, and Double Taxation Avoidance Agreement. The Korean government also is actively in transferring advanced custom administration capabilities, such as Korean Electronics Customs Clearance System, we called it UNIPAS. This system significantly enhanced the custom clearance, which is the essential for the seamless implementation of the AFCFTA and cooperation between Africa and Korean companies. In line with this approach, we are also striving to center the Korea-Africa Summit on economic and businesses. South Korean government have decided to dedicate the entire day of the June 5th solely to the business interactions. The Korea-Africa Business Summit will bring together government officials and business leaders from both sides to explore various avenues. And Korea-Africa Business Consultations, B2B, will also offer African business leaders and companies with opportunity to connect with relevant Korean counterparts, fostering that genuine investment opportunities. The Korea-Africa Summit presents crucial opportunity to translate the potential into reality. As African development journey advanced and the developmental partnership between Korea and Africa evolves. The abnormal climate events are beginning more frequently and causing serious damage around the world. The need for cooperation to respond to the climate changes is more urgent than ever. In particular, it is true that the African countries are very vulnerable to the negative effect of the climate changes, despite its lower greenhouse gas emissions. As you rightly point out, the climate changes lead to the decrease in the agricultural productions. In this regard, Korean government is actively supporting food safety sufficient in Africa through the various projects, including the K-Rice Belt Initiative, which aim to support African countries to improve their rice self-sufficient rate through the development of the high-yielding rice varieties, supply of seeds and technique training, etc. Currently, our government have signed an MOU with 10 African countries to promote the K-Rice Belt project. In addition, the Korean government has been carrying out the various projects to support African countries suffering extremely damaged from the climate change to recover. We will continue to serve as a green ladder to resolve the climate gap in the international community by expanding green ODA and expanding financial resources to respond to climate changes. The Korea aspires to become a global pivotal state which actively harness Korea's growing strength and the capability in advancing freedom, peace, and prosperity in the international community, especially in this poly-crisis era. The South Koreans 2024 to 2025, the term at the UN Security Council will be an important opportunity to realize our aspiration to safeguarding freedom, peace, and prosperity globally. As a member of the Council, South Korea is committed to fulfilling the Council's duty of the maintaining international peace and security. In particular, South Korea plans to take a lead in shaping discussions on, among others, peacekeeping and peace building, women, peace and security, cybersecurity, as well as climate change and security. Moreover, we recognize the importance of the supporting African leadership and ownership in securing sustainable peace in Africa. South Korea is committed to strengthening the capacity of the African Union and the sub-regional organization. To this end, Korean government can contribute to over $18 million since 2016 to support AU peace and security activities. Also, the Korea has been actively participating in the AU-UN groups of the friends, enhancing coordination on African issues both at the AU and the UN. Okay.
Thank you for
yeah.
Thank you for that description of history, context, and more. This is an interesting step forward in not just Korean-African relations, but also relationships between Africa and Asian countries generally. And with that, let's go to Bob Wekesa in Johannesburg, because Bob is an expert on Africa's relationships with Asian countries. And Bob will now introduce our guests from around the African continent. Bob.
Thanks, Adam. I was almost, concerned that you are requesting me to speak, but actually my role is very simple right now, and it's very direct, is to invite Ambassador Ngovi Kitau, who is Kenya's first ambassador to Korea, and is a public intellectual, is involved in consultancy work, he's very knowledgeable in these matters. And so without further ado, so that Ambassador Kitau, you can have as much time as possible to discuss with us perhaps the historical perspectives on the relations, expectations for Africans heading to Seoul in June, and perhaps touching a bit on the roles of universities and think tanks and the whole area of knowledge production. So over to you, Ambassador Kitau. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I will present to you what I know about Africa and Korea relationships and what we expect in the coming summit. Before I do that, I would like to say one thing. I am a practitioner. I deliberate on policy and I implement policy. That's all what I do. And that's all what I've done for a living. And I was the first Kenyan ambassador to Korea for two reasons. Number one, I was sent down to Korea to find out why a relationship of 1964 has not matured. And then to establish what needs to be done and go ahead and implement that. And that's what I did between 2009 and 2014. Now, the Africa-Korea relationship is a long one. It goes back to the Korean War. The Korean War happened 2 years after Korea attained independence from the US and the Russians, or what we say, the first Cold War. From Africa, we were able to send close to 3,500 soldiers and about 119 jet fighters to support Korea. Ethiopia was the first country which sent a battalion to support South Korea, and they sent 3,158 soldiers. And that was followed by South Africa, which sent 826 soldiers and 119 jet fighters. So right from the beginning, Africa has supported South Korea. But I would like to mention to you at a very early stage that the relationship between Africa and South Korea has been skewed towards South Korea. So after the First Republic, which was 1948 to 1960, there was a military coup in Korea, and I think it was General Park Chung-hee took over, and he established the Second Republic between 1961 and 1963. That time, Korea's focus on Africa was motivated by gaining support should another war break out. And Park Chung-hee made a lot of effort to establish diplomatic relations with Africa. And in the First Republic, he actually managed to establish relations with 18 countries. And during the Second Republic and the Third Republic, he was able to do another 9 and 6. But no Korean president between 1948 and 1982 visited Africa. But African president visited Korea. So the relationship was skewed towards Korea. Then after the Fourth Republic, during the Fifth Republic, was set up by another military general, Chon Do-won. His focus was on international recognition. He wanted support from Africa for international recognition. And he is the first president to visit Africa in 1982. He visited four African countries, including Kenya, my own country. And he developed a very warm relationship with the African countries to the extent that when the Seoul Olympic Games were held in 1988, 42 African countries participated in those games, purely as two countries supported Korea during the Olympic Games. And then after that, the Korean constitution changed. And Korea became a democracy in 1987. And they went into what we call a single 5-year term for presidency. And then we had a couple of presidents for the Fifth Republic. That time, Korea was really looking for support. And Africa was able to support Korea to join the UN in 1991, and also in the election of Korea getting a seat in the UN Security Council in 1997. So that gives you the background of how we have moved between Korea and Africa. Then from 2003 to today, or 2003 to 2022, there was a bit of institutionalization in the way Africa and Korea was operating. As much as we are saying this is the first Korea-Africa forum or summit, the first Korea-Africa summit was in 2006 during the reign of our President Roh Moo-hyun. And the second one was in 2009. And the fifth one was held in 2022 during the presidency of Moon Jae-in. So Africa has supported Korea in very many ways. Korea has also supported Africa, and especially in the ODA, which Professor Cho mentioned. But when it comes to the ODA, you need to understand one thing, that Korea foreign policy is a trade policy. So Korea does not put money where there's no commercial interest. And the ODA has been minimal. The highest we ever received was from Moon Jae-in in 2022, which was about $560 million, which represented 25% of the total Korean ODA. Last year, Korea managed an ODA of 3.13 billion, and this year, Yoon has given a estimate was 4.7. But what gets to Africa is about 20 to 30%. Most of the ODA goes to Southeast Asia, because that's where Korea has done a lot of investments, especially in Vietnam. They are running farms there, they are running a port. So most of the ODA goes to Southeast Asia. Now, the second part I want to talk about is what we expect from Korea in this summit. If you look at the summit portal, the chairman and the Minister of Foreign Affairs has articulated what Korea needs from Africa. And there are three things Korea wants from Africa. Number one, they want support, as Professor said, in GPS, the global pivotal state. That is one. It is already spelled out it is posted there. Number two, they want access to Africa's critical minerals. Right now, critical minerals is the game. And Korea is receiving 80% of its critical minerals from China. And currently, there is a little bit of friction between Korea and China because of the way the current president has activated issues, especially issues regarding the Indo-Pacific, mainly the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. So Korea is looking for alternative sources of minerals. And number three, it is the African market under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So those are the three things which the Minister of Foreign Affairs has said Korea requires from Africa. And what are they giving in return? Exactly what the professor said, that we will gain from their development experience. That is fine, but that is not sufficient to us. We have discussed this issue very many times. And when you look at how Korea started its development experience, they had a lot of support during the construction. They got support from America. They got support from Japan, something which Koreans don't want to admit, but they did get about 800 million in terms of grant and subsidy loans as a compensation for colonization. And actually, it is the Americans. If I remember well, Yoon raised this issue when he had a visit in the Congress. It is the Americans, as a professor and economist, who drew the economic development plan for Korea. So Korea received all this support. Now, when you compare Korea and Africa, you need to know something or two things. Number one, Korea is one country with a common origin common beliefs, same culture. Africa is not a country. Africa has got more than 3,000 linguistic communities, each with a different origin, different beliefs, different cultures. So as much as we want to say it's possible to adopt, to copy Korean development experience, it is not that easy. The conditions are very different. If you look at the way the Sema Undong was done, which jump-started Korea, because the issue was, and it was happening in Africa as well, because I do remember that the Park Chung-hee and President Kenyatta of Kenya were good friends, and they implemented that model together. But it succeeded in Korea, and it didn't succeed in Kenya, and there are reasons why. Korea was coming from a background of colonization, just like Africa, and the issue was to change the mindset. And through Semal, Park was able to come up with a doctrine which was based on diligence, self-help, and cooperation, founded on the Confucianism mentality. And then it was institutionalized. So the Koreans grew up believing the same thing, knowing the same things. So it was easy to develop Korea that way. And then when they did their 5-year plans, unlike in Africa, they had they had committees meeting between the government and the private sector. And the time when Park took over from 1961 to 1996, when Korea stopped being an aid recipient, a couple of things happened. For example, we have Agenda 2063 today, and in Kenya we have Vision 2030. But the Korean model was very different from ours. For example, so when Korea did their development plans, the 5-year development plans, the first thing they did was to have a very clear vision of what they wanted. The question was, and the question is, if Kenya is to follow Korea or Uganda or another country, what will hold people together to subscribe to that vision? In the case of Korea, the first question they asked was, what will drive their vision, call it 1996? They identified exports as the driver of their vision. Number 2, they identified 5 economic sectors. That was electronics, automobiles, steel, shipbuilding, and petrochemicals. And today, they are still in the top 5 in the world in those sectors. And then number 3, who was to drive that vision? It was indigenous Koreans, which were to drive those sectors. Now, when it comes to our situation now, you find that we are being driven, as Professor is saying, by plans from outside. Plans which have not been researched for our countries, and then we end up doing so much and not succeeding. The next thing I would like to look at is, since Korea has identified what they need in the summit, what do Africans need? What are the priorities for Africa? I will see the first priority right now is to synchronize and come up with a common policy between Africa and Korea. There is very little benefit for African heads of states to fly down to Korea if they don't have a common foreign policy towards Korea, and if they don't have an integrated economic strategy for the Republic of Korea. So the first thing is, I think we need to have a policy between Africa and Korea. Right now, there is no policy. Korea has only 3 foreign policies. The first one is the Indo-Pacific, driven by the US. The second one is the Northern Korea, for obvious reasons. And then the third one is the world. So Africa comes under the category of the world. And that is not good for Africa. If we are going to have 54 countries sitting in Korea, we need to have a clear policy between Korea and Africa. The second thing I want to talk about is trade. there is very little trade between Korea and Africa, despite all the help we are getting from Korea. If you look at the figures of last year, Korea was able to transact a volume of $1.3 trillion. And the only business with Africa was 23 billion, which is a very small percentage. The reason is Korea will only go, the Korean investors will go with the government. And the government is not investing enough in Africa because the ODA is so small. So the investors are going with the ODA. Second one is investments. Last year, the Korea invested 63 billion outside Korea. Most of that money went to North America, then it went to Europe, then it went to Asia, then it went to Latin America. The amount which went to those four regions is 98% of the $63 billion. So only 2% was left to share with Africa, Oceanic, and the others. So there are opportunities for Korea to invest in Africa. One of them is in the critical minerals, which they are chasing from Africa. I very strongly believe that Korea should not just mine, as right now they are mining graphite in Tanzania and Madagascar and processing in Mexico. I feel that Korea should invest in critical minerals, process them in Africa, refine them in in Africa, and then take it wherever they want to. The other thing, so I've talked about the policy, which is not there, then trade, then investment. The other thing I want to talk about is like this meeting we're having today. You find that Korea doesn't prepare for these summits because it is driven by elites in the foreign affairs and some from the US. Unlike China, China has what we call the China-Africa Think Tank Forum, which is a sub-forum of the bigger summit. But Korea has what we call the Seoul Dialogue on Africa. That Seoul Dialogue on Africa needs to be expanded and reformed to include think tanks from Africa and universities from Africa, so we have relevant information which is beneficial to Africa. Then the other thing I would like to mention is that what will help us is with Korea. Korea is very good in soft power and all that. If there's a way we can do joint research and set up joint businesses, joint startups, that will be very beneficial to Africa. So in conclusion, this summit, we need to make decisions in key areas like trade, investments, policy, research, and how we coordinate this. It should upgrade the relationship between Africa and Korea from the current one to what we call comprehensive strategic alliance. That is the highest point in a partnership. The same Korea has with the US, with the European Union, with India, with Japan, and with China. We should be at the same level. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Kitau, for those very thought-provoking and sometimes very candid observations. I think we take it in the spirit of academia and public intellectual work that we have to tackle some very tough issues so that we build a relationship. I think it's now my turn to invite Professor Steve Sharra, who is an independent Malawian researcher and educationist. Until 2024, he was Associate Professor of Education and Dean of School of Education at Unicaf, University of Malawi. And I would like to just make a small proviso here that Professor Sharra, we want to now see if we can have you speak for about 10 minutes. And also the colleague will follow another 10 minutes because the two previous speakers, Professor Cho and Ambassador Kitau, gave us a very big context. I've provided quite some substantive context and background. So now it's not that I'm limiting you too much, but I thought if you could have 10 minutes each That will take us per my time to about 4:20 p.m. South African time, 10:20 DC time. And then that will also then allow for engagement with audience. I can feel the audience palpable energy there. They're waiting to ask questions. But for now, over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, Bob, for that introduction. And I will get straight to the point. So I want to give a little bit of history for the Malawi aspect of the Korea-Africa relations. So I'll say something about Malawi's relationship with South Korea, a little bit of history, and then I will come to talk about the current situation and finish with my perspectives on what I think the new relationship based on the summit needs to look up to. So I will probably maybe repeat some of what Ambassador Kitau has said, but I think it's quite critical what he said, and I think repeating it will be important. So Malawi and South Korea established their first diplomatic relations back in 1965, which was 1 year after Malawi's independence. Since then, there have been several high-level visits between the two countries. If I can just mention two on each side. From the Korean side, in 1976, the special envoy of the South Korean president visited Malawi. And in 2003, the president of the Korea Institute, the Korea International Cooperation Agency, KOICA, also visited Malawi. On the Malawi side, it's as Ambassador Kitau said, it's up to the highest level of Malawi. The presidents have been visiting Korea. So, for example, in 1995, the second vice president of Malawi, at the time Chakufa Chihana, visited South Korea. But in 2010, President Bingu Wamtarika, who was president at the time, visited South Korea. And in 2013, again, President Joyce Banda also visited South Korea. And when Joyce Banda visited South Korea, she came back with a labor agreement, a migrant labor agreement. South Korea accepted to be welcoming up to 100,000 young Malawians to work in the country. I have been trying to check the status of that agreement today. I don't have it. I think I'll learn a little later. But most recently, in 2023, October, the Prime Minister of South Korea visited Malawi, Han Duck-soo. He was in Malawi and he held bilateral talks with the President of Malawi, Dr. Lazarus McCarthy Chakwera. And at that meeting, the two countries signed a memorandum of agreement and included cooperation agreements in a number of areas, including health and education and agriculture and technology transfers, taking advantage of the advances that South Korea has made in technology, which is also what Professor Cho alluded to earlier. And at that meeting, at the signing of the MOU, the Foreign Minister of Malawi, Nancy Tembo, made a comment which is a point of discussion amongst lots of Malawian academics and even African intellectuals. She pointed out that in 1964, when Malawi got its independence, the GDPs of the two countries were more or less the same. But today, South Korea has taken off and is among the most developed countries in the world, and Malawi is still one of the least developed countries. Just to cite some statistics, for example, I did a check, and I think the most recent stats were from 2022. But in 2022, South Korea's GDP was $1.7 trillion, almost $1.7 trillion. And then the GDP per capita was 32,000 US dollars, with a population of 51.6 million people. And then we look at the Malawi statistics. The Malawi GDP in 2022 was 13.2 billion. And if you do the mathematics, South Korea's GDP in 2022 was 130 times that of Malawi. For the GDP per capita, Malawi's in 2022 was 645 US dollars. And the mathematics shows that South Korea's GDP per capita was 50 times that of Malawi's. And Malawi's population in 2022 was 20.5 million, so half of the population of South Korea. So there have been exchanges. I think these visits that I just mentioned is just a small portion. There have been lots of visits, including cultural visits. In 2018, a Malawian band called Losowilo, it's a popular band here, they were visiting South Korea for the third time in 4 years in 2018. So just one example of some of the exchange visits that happened. And in 2017, the Korean government website indicated that there were 145 South Koreans living in Malawi. I haven't been able to find the number of Malawians living in South Korea as of 2022 or even recently, but I know Malawians are all over the world, and so I know there are Malawians who have been to South Korea, and some of them are also living there. So let me get to the next half of my brief talk and share, I think, so echo what Ambassador Kitau said. Some 10 or so years ago, the late Malawian economist, Thandika Mkandawire, is a renowned economist, gave a series of talks at the University of Cape Town, where he was a visiting professor. And one of the things he pointed out in one of his lectures was that there was all this criticism regarding this one country plus Africa summits. So you get one major country and then it convenes the rest of the continent in a summit, and it's been happening quite frequently. Some critics have seen this as demeaning of the continent because in terms of geopolitics, it really relegates Africa to the other end of in terms of geopolitical power. But Thandika's point was exactly the point that Ambassador Kitau made, that the problem really was that while these countries, China and India, the US, all of them, South Korea, they have a strategy for Africa. Africa doesn't have a strategy for each of these countries. And so when the deals are being made, when negotiations are being made, what Africa gets are not of strategic value. Here in Malawi, we've benefited from some of these agreements, but you see roads, you see stadia, universities, but mostly from China. So I just want to echo the importance of, I think, Africa developing a strategy to handle these summits and these relationships, as Ambassador Kitau said. I think these summits are here to stay. I'm sure there'll be more of them, and I don't know that they will stop anytime soon. If you just look at the asymmetry in power, in terms of political power, geopolitical power, economic power, I think these things will continue because Africa does need these relations. So I want to end on the point that also Ambassador Kitau mentioned regarding how this needs to be a quid pro quo, that what South Korea is clear what it wants from Africa. can Africa be clear what it wants from South Korea? So one of the things the ambassador mentioned was critical minerals that South Korea and also other developed countries are looking for, especially the energy transition. That is now, I think, a huge agenda. Malawi has got some of the most critical minerals on the planet. For example, Malawi has got deposits of rare earth. It's got bauxite, it's got uranium, and Malawi is also known to have the largest deposit of rutile. That's in the world. Rutile is a source of titanium ore used in high-tech alloys, so for making glass and porcelain and ceramics and so on. So as far as having that quid pro quo, having an equal exchange, I think Malawi has things to offer South Korea, just as South Korea has things to offer Malawi. But I think it's really important to pay attention to what President Museveni said at the World Bank IDA conference in Nairobi last month. He talked about this asymmetry in terms of how Africa is just a producer of raw materials and it gets a really tiny amount. And then when the commodities go abroad, other countries reap huge benefits. And so this is a huge source of exploitation. I am reassured, I think, by what Professor Cho said at the beginning in terms of the shared history that Africa and Korea have together, shared history of colonialism, and also, I think, shared values, and also the desire for a shared future. My hope is that if we can really stress these shared values and the equal relationship, then it should be incumbent upon both sides to make sure that there is equality in terms of the benefits of the resources from each side. And so I think I'm hoping that we really can draw on what holds us together as countries from the global south, at least at some point, although now our colleagues are no longer in the global south. So I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sharra. In fact, I do recall earlier this year we had a meeting again in Kampala of the G77, which is a global south entity. And I read a little of the history and realized that South Korea used to be part of the G77, but it's no longer part of the G77. So yeah, I think there are transitions there to consider. But I think, and I'm certain that the audience can't wait to weigh into this discussion because of the issues that have emerged. And so without further ado, I'll ask my colleague, Dr. Joana Eva Dodoo, who is a lecturer in the Department of Distance Programs, College of Distance Education, University of Cape Coast in Ghana. I think the floor is yours. And again, I'll request that you figure out how to do some summary of some form so that we get to the question and answer. But over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, the moderators, and also thank you to Adam for the invitation to participate in this discussion. It's very important that we have varied perspective on the issues. And the first speaker has highlighted the relationship between Africa and Korea, and even indicated some projects that Korea has undertaken on the continent of Africa. Well, and also the second speaker, Ambassador Kitau, has mentioned, he has given a historical perspective of our relationship. It goes way back, and then the nature of the relationship that we have had with Korea. This summit, to me, it's taking another trajectory in terms of relationship, seeking to have a shared growth in terms of sustainability. And then also they are seeking Africa's support to solidarize with them as they seek to becoming a global pivotal state. with this project that Korea has undertaken, they have indicated, but I believe that research has also indicated that some of these projects lacks continuity, especially after the project's lifespan elapsed. So it's important that while this cost still on the table, thinking of partnership, the key partner in this relationship, that is Africa, think of how to localize these initiatives to suit our context. And localizing this initiative, I believe, is important, and it will promote inclusion, it will promote involvement, and then ownership of such initiatives. Just as Korea has transitioned from a donor-receiving country, I believe through purposeful strategies and the appropriate intervention, Africa can achieve self-feed. For instance, Ghana attempted with the Ghana Beyond Aid strategy charter, which was shared broadly with the aim of building a wealthy, inclusive, sustainable, and empowered, resilient Ghana. One challenge I see is that some of these charters, policies must go beyond. We need to look beyond the originators, political actors who originated such policies, and also their time frame whilst in office. We need to take it further to include other political parties, key stakeholders, that these plans, this charter can be achieved beyond the political parties that originated it. And one of our problems I have noted is that there is that aspect of lack of continuity of policies. So when one party comes into office, they come up with a policy, they neglect what is on the table. So this partnership that we are thinking of, we have to look at it from the broader perspective. And I believe looking at it from the broader perspective will help us. Indeed, it's important that we have a shift of such policies beyond the political regimes and the time frames of the originators. It should take a national developmental agenda such that we all will be involved in the design, especially researchers, especially research institutions, the universities. We all should be involved in the design and the implementation of such process. One would ask, is this partnership we are talking about important? Yes, I believe partnership with Korea, partnership with all other nations, existing ones, are important. And we cannot dismiss them, especially within a globalized context. What is important for Africa is to stick to our plan. Do we have a plan? Yes, we have a plan for economic growth. As example is the AFTRA, but we have to stick to our plan. There is the need for us to also look for sustainable ways of achieving our objectives. There is the need for both strong leadership and strong systems to work together. There should be that synergy between these to ensure that every initiative, every relationship or partnership is monitored by such strong systems. I heard from the first speaker talking about the agriculture, the rice belt project that they are already undertaking in Africa. Yes, agriculture is very important. And so in this partnership, we need to address the issue of seasonal cultivation. In such partnership, there is this digital economy. Yes, we can also harness on this. Korea has the softwares, and Africa, we also do have similar softwares. There are startups, organizations in Africa, a number of them championed by our youth. I believe that this synergy will help us a lot because it will bring on board the youth that is the huge population that is emerging at the moment. We will bring them on board and they will feel part of this whole discourse. Aside from the digital economy and its participation, I think that we have to also look at the role of research in all these discussions. We need to include the academia and then research, emphasize on research, so that the results that we are implementing is based on evidence, clear evidence. We are looking at partnership, but the role of Africa in this partnership is important. Are we going to be just a silent partner, or we are going to be active partners? And the ambassador mentioned that we have to have that policy clearly defining our roles, who gets what, and having that partnership based on equal distribution of power, I believe is important. If there's a partnership and then the distribution of power is unequal, there will be no equity. And in the end, it would be as if there wasn't the need for such partnership. We need to learn from history and make sure that the lessons we learn from history, we apply them appropriately for the present and for the future. And so, as the moderator said, I won't take much time. I will end here and then we'll give the floor for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dodoo. And I think you've amplified an important point, which is research and the involvement of academia. I suppose we are going to miss out on that. But at this point, I think I'd like to invite my colleague, Adam, to lead us into the engagement, the interactive session. Over to you. Thanks. And thanks to the speakers. Yeah.
Thank you, Bob. And we have people online from 3 continents. I see some first-time people who are diplomats, U.S. diplomats, who actually is one representing the U.S. in Asia, one representing the U.S. in South Africa, a third. It's interesting how different topics draw different audiences. If you'd like to ask a question, if you are joining us online, just please, you can raise your hand using the control at the bottom of your screen. Those of you who are here in person in Washington, D.C., you can, if you're at the table, just raise your card, and otherwise just come forward. But while we are having our questions and comments from our online participants and from those who are joining us here in Washington, D.C., Professor Cho, I wonder, after you've heard of the reactions from around Africa, if you'd like to make a few remarks. But again, to echo my colleague Bob Wekesa, we want to leave time for discussion. So if you could address a few things, if you want, concisely.
Yeah, thank you for the Ambassador Kitau and Professor Sharra, and then Professor Dodoo. Actually, the Ambassador Kitau actually explained the long history of South Africa and Kenya, or South Korea and Kenya, and Korea and Africa. Yes, we have a very long histories, but I think this summit will be amplifying the relationship between South Korea and many African countries. I know many African audience like you and the many African peoples are wondering why, what makes South Korea try to hold like 1+ Africa summit, whether South Korea have ability to handle or have resources to handle. But I think South Korea, we, as I introduced earlier, we have a very similar history of experience with Africa. And right now, as the Ambassador Kitau mentioned, the South Koreans, the ODA, right now about 45% of the ODA goes to the Southeast Asia. But I mentioned earlier, from this moment, our government tried to double the volume of the ODA, but I think, Southeast Asia already developed a lot, and our government or our business tried to enlarge or adventure the different market or different potential. So right now, our government and our business companies actually looking at the Africa, whether they have, Africa has a potential to invest or not. I think this summit actually is a starting point for South Korean people to looking at the Africa, and also through inviting many African the leaders to South Korea, and maybe many of them for them to visit South Korea for the first time, and they are wondering, they heard about South Korea, but does visiting to Seoul and South Korea also have a significant impact on their attitude towards South Korea? So I think both the private and public, the South Korean people and African, the people, they know each other from the summit. And also, a few weeks ago, I met the professors from University of Ghana, and they are the professors from the Ghana, and most of them, this was the first experience for them to visit Seoul, and they was very impressed. They told me it was very impressive. They just heard and they just watching through the YouTube, but just visiting the South Africa, and they really like the South Korean peoples and cultures and atmosphere. And I think, South Korea also has some attractiveness for many African countries. So I think this summit will be very big moment, both sides to engage to each other, know each other. I hope.
Thank you. Thank you. Lee Simmons, you have a question? You want to come to the table?
Sure.
We can pick you up on audio more easily. While we're getting set up, 15 years ago, USC asked me to open the USC facility in Seoul. And one of the USC alumni, there's a very large number of USC alumni in Korea, and one of the alumni said that his family was in the dairy business, and they were using software to help run the business, software which was written in Kenya, and that they learned about at the annual competition in Nairobi. So it's interesting how some stereotypes are not the case. Lee Simmons.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. My name is Lee Simmons. I am a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic also, wear a couple other hats. This is a question to the panelists in regards to, you want me to hear? Okay, sure, I could do that. This is a comment and a question about manufacturing in Africa. I've got background in supply chains and manufacturing, mostly on the consumer goods and pharmaceuticals and biotech. A lot of people don't know is the Korean government not only has invested in Southeast Asia, and they also have done a lot of things in Africa through partnerships with my previous employer, African Development Bank. One of the things that I would like to see is more, besides value addition. I think one of the things that that we all have to recognize is as the continent scales from 1.5 billion, that's where we are today, to 2.5 billion in the next 25 years. There's going to be an increase in disposable income. So how do you address that market? But also, I like to see more Korean multinationals, LG, Samsung, set up shop, not just manufacture, but also set up R&D centers connected to vocational skills and tertiary institutions. Once you do that, you have the same thing that was set up in the 70s and 80s when HP, Intel, other US manufacturers set that up in Southeast Asian countries. Africa needs that same type of partnership. So, and that's what a great way to not only secure your critical minerals, but you also, I have an article coming out in FP about this. It's titled the whole China +1 strategy, many year supply chain risk to China, where you're looking at Malaysia, Vietnam. Africa needs to be a part of that conversation. You know, nobody's talking about Africa as a destination for, I'm not saying we can manufacture semiconductors because that takes up a lot of water. You need a whole ecosystem, but could we do R&D for, could we program the semiconductor chips? Flash memory is pretty much easy to manufacture. Semiconductors are very complex due to, you know, the EV, there's all these layers to make a semiconductor chip. You just, and the damn plant is about $5 billion, right? So we're having a base load electricity issues in Africa. We're having water issues in Africa, but there are young kids who graduate from university without a job. And this is an opportunity to show commitment. Put your money where your mouth is. That's basically what I'm saying. And what are some ways that South Korea can distinguish itself from China? So there's two questions. One, how can the Korean government incentivize its multinationals? And I've told this to Congress. How can South Korea incentivize its multinationals to extend its supply chain, including R&D, to Africa, connected to vocational tertiary institutions, just like the U.S. did in 70s and 80s? And two, what was the second part I said? Well, that's there. If I can figure out the last part, I'll say that. But that's just something I throw to the panelists right there. Thank you.
Reaction from any of our speakers?
Okay, can I answer? Can I provide the opinions about the questions?
Please.
Okay. I think, you know, right now, I met have you heard about Hyundai Mobility? Actually, this is the big companies that produce automobiles, and right now it exports to US, Americas, and Europe. But this CEO actually tried to make a visit to Nigeria, and because, you know, right now Africa can be a, you know, potential for the market for the automobiles. So, you know, in South Korea, and the conglomerate like LG and Samsung, right now they do not have any specific plan, but still they just to try to visit the Africa and see the market potentials and also the potential for the investment. But still, Africa is far away from South Korea, and also many Koreans are not familiar with African situation. And also because the private sector, when they try to input a lot of the investment, they try to, you know, risk aversive. They try to reduce the risks, right? So that's why these companies always ask the South Korean government to try to go along with, and then they have a good relationship with the African countries, the government, and then they reduce the uncertainty to investment. I think this summit is going to be a starting point, because this summit, you know, many African countries, the leaders visit to Seoul, and then also the Korean companies also participate in this summit, and they share the information, and, you know, they have to find out how we can reduce the uncertainty when those South Korean companies to invest in Africa. And also, I think as a, you know, African specialist in South Korea, you know, the quality of the governance, you know, whether the African countries, you know, when they invite those investments, the government also try to show how they develop their governance, the transparency and reduce corruption, and also whether the laws are really trustable or not. So I think the African government also prepare for, you know, the institution when South Korean and the African government want more invest from the South Korean companies. Also, the foreign countries, when they try to invest, they have to reduce their uncertainty. So African government try to help those foreign private companies to, see some certainty when they try to invest a lot of money in Africa. That is my thought.
Okay, we see a couple of hands raised online. We have Hulda Fami, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question and comment.
Thank you. And thank you to all the speakers. And it's really encouraging that Korea is investing in Africa, and also that Africa can invest in Korea and exchange ideas. I'm Hulda with Jubilee Campaign and Set My People Free, and we work a lot on religious freedom issues. So my question is to both, like all the panelists, how can Africa and South Korea work on promoting freedom of thought and conscience and religion and belief in Africa, but also globally? And specifically, there's still 11 countries that have the death penalty for apostasy and blasphemy, which is super central for religious freedom, to choose what you want to believe or not to believe, and cause suffering for people from all faiths. So how can Africa and Korea cooperate, and actually, because there are many religious countries in Africa where they have strong religious freedom protections. So how can they collaborate on that?
Excuse me.
Anybody want to take that question?
Yeah, sorry. The question is how Africa and Korea can work together? Is that the question? Well, at multilateral level, we do have the Sustainable Development Goals, which brings us together. And we also have the Paris Agreement on climate change. And at bilateral as Africa and Korea, this is what we are saying, that we synchronize the Agenda 2063 with whatever Korea wants to do with Africa. There should be no fear on the Korean side, as Professor has mentioned, about the risks. There are no risks, because we do have all the instruments for non-commercial risks. You find that many African countries are members of the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency of the World Bank. They are also members of the International Committee on Settlement of Investment Disputes. And we do have a complete toolkit of how we can engage, and the risks are really minimal. The only challenge we are facing is that the Korean investors follow the government. And the Korean foreign policy is the trade policy. Can come into the issue of Professor mentioned about Samsung. You find that the trade policy of Korea, the focus is on advanced markets like US, where you can redeem your money quickly. The second level is large emerging markets like Brazil, South Africa. And then the third one is mineral-rich countries like the ones in Africa. So if that policy can change, then it will be very easy to work together. Thank you.
One of our regulars in these forums is Hussein Amin from the American University in Cairo. He emailed me this morning that it's the last day of classes today, so he's a little busy. But he did want to just offer one comment, which is related to what we're discussing now, which is he said the largest company in Egypt is Samsung. So interesting how this works out. But I believe you had a comment also.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad Ambassador Kitau already mentioned it. It's about the relation between Sustainable Development Goals and what unites us all with countries' relations. And apart from that, in terms of the cultural, religious interchange, I think there's one thing that we can also tap into South Korea's existing system, which is the multimedia, the art, the culture bloom. So maybe through those collaborations and the creativity of our youth in Africa can somehow, they can cross fertilize from this existing system, that they can help each other. This is one of the things that I wanted to say.
Thank you. Primrose, I believe you had a question.
Sure. again, it's about soft power and soft diplomacy. And it was going to be around, my question concerns the linguistic barrier between Korea and Africa, and the stereotype that especially South Korea suffers when it comes to trade and investment in Africa. And as Ambassador Kitau said, we aim to have comprehensive strategic alliance, the highest level of diplomacy and investment. But I can't see, for a couple of decades now, I'm failing to see how Korea is literally mastering soft diplomacy to be able to penetrate into Africa and dominate business-wise like China has managed to. And not in a way that in the end Africans have to learn the language, but also in a way that Koreans learn African languages. Because there's always that, if we have to learn yours, why can't you learn ours? And that that pushback is always there. And I'm failing to see how it's mastering any tangible success in breaking that cultural barrier, that linguistic barrier. I don't know how. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question. What is the impact of the Sahel countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and the other one? Niger, and their efforts to decolonialize in the new era, so to speak, having on all of this discussion that we're having now in terms of Korea and Africa?
Interesting question. Anyone like to discuss that?
Okay, no, maybe I can, Adam, I can weigh in very quickly and just say very briefly that to the extent that this Sahel region, the so-called coup belt countries, are now increasingly in the Russian loop, or particularly because the instability there has actually provided a very good environment for the entry of Russia there. And I think, as Ambassador Kitau was mentioning, South Korea is a US ally. And to some extent, there's a level of coordination between South Korea and the US, even on matters to do with Africa. At least there is, if not full coordination, there is a level of concurrence, of congruence, of kind of partnership. So that will suggest upfront that South Korea will have a difficulty going into places like Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, for the simple geopolitical reason. I think we do know that South Korea, for example, is actually involved in Lobito corridor development, that port to railway project from Angola, the Lobito port in Angola, all the way to DRC and Zambia, and Zambia, right? So this will be a project in which South Korea is comfortable being involved in, because US, European Union, and so forth, which are allies of South Korea, are. But going into a territory that is very difficult to handle, like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, I think it will be very difficult, and that's my view. But I also wanted to point out that there's a colleague, Hans, here, who's been looking to speak. Maybe can get a chance. There's a message to that effect in the chat. Thank you.
Yes, definitely.
Oh, good everyone. Thank you very much. I struggled to see the handshake, the hand symbol here, but I couldn't find it. My name is Hans from University of Silesia. I followed every detail of the explanation, especially from Professor Cho and Ambassador Kitau. All of them with the analysis were quite good, but One of the things which I would like to say is in 2015, I attended a conference in Seoul. It was an ODA conference, and I think the Korean speaker, it was a Korean diplomat, he was talking about the exportation and of the Semolodong, which the Korean look upon as a good model. And for more than 3 years now, I've been working on that project of Semolodong. And I noticed the Koreans, they are trying to fuse in this model into Africa. However, this model has failed in Tanzania. This model has failed in DRC. And where we have some lingering strands of success in Rwanda. And the first question is, if this model of 1970, Park Chung-hee's project, if it faced those, of course, these geographical challenges that we all know, some of the issues of geopolitics that we still know, and then we come to talk about the cultural differences. Do the Korean people still insist that Semolodong in the package of the Korean model can be exported to Africa? Or perhaps, like Dr. Joana was saying, that the researchers may have to carry out some adaptability, some adjustments, so that it suits the situation of each African state, not the entire African state, because the African people, they have a cultural differences, how they react to projects, different per state, how they react to politics, all of them different. And so some research may have to come in, but you come to think of it, you may have to come to say something about that. And then let me just quickly go to the second aspect. The second aspect which we talk about is, you talk about partnership, you talk about cooperation, you talk about AIDS. And we are having some very new debates if Africa still really need aid. Well, we don't want to double onto that if we actually need aid. But if we are going to talk about aid, the first thing is, what is the model? Is the aid going to follow the same dimension? We know about the African-American relations, of course, the French-African relations, and of course, the Sino-African relations. What is the uniqueness of this new Korean-African relations? How unique is it? How different is it? And are we into a situation where the Korea is trying to create another hegemon, like we have France, filtering into politics of Africa from a distance? Are we trying to have such kind of situation? And if we are not having such kind of situation now, then we will have scraped away aid, and then we go to trade. Ambassador Kitau said a couple number of things which are like very sensitive to this debate. And I would like to say that when we talk about trade, we talk about growth, and you said they were going to increase, they were going to double the ODA by 2030. And I would have suggested that we talk about some automobile, the Hyundai, Daewoo should go to create some factories in Africa, and why not we have some Samsung City put in Africa for assemblers of Samsung phones, some Galaxy, all of that. Why do we talk about give you aid? We give you aid. Even the South Koreans, when they receive aid from before Park Chung-hee, when they receive aid from the United States, we have the research that the South Korea also was a good example of the aid curse. They didn't use the aid very well. And so when we talk about the mismanagement of aid in Africa and elsewhere, South Korea is also one of the people guilty of that. And so we can't keep on trying to continue with the aid curse like we have it in Africa. So I think you may have to comment on this, and thank you very much for your presentation and your interest, your country's interest in Africa. But all of these things has to do with policies, and we have new African thinkers, which we are going to, which a lot of things has to go through discussions, has to go through antagonism and questioning. And if this is not done, we begin to see how new development, new ideas, new visitation will instead cause conflict. We didn't talk about conflict yet, but we find a situation where too much aid may be in the hands of policy makers and policies implementers. It comes to go and it doesn't filter down into the general public, and then we have an old situation which we'll be struggling to handle these days. And that is the cause conflict. Thank you very much, and nice to meet all of you.
Thank you. And of course, if you talk about mismanagement of aid, that takes place in a variety of countries and a variety of settings. Here in the United States, we have a difficulty managing some of the COVID relief funds for the last 2 years. So this is not something limited to Africa. We have a hand raised by William Lord. If you can come forward with your question or comment.
Yes. So someone asked a question not long ago. They asked about the dealing with the language barrier and how willing our Korean partners were to learn African languages instead of just teaching the Korean language. I'm not sure if we addressed that question, but I think it's very important to understand the level of partnership.
Would anyone like to take that question?
Can I say something on the linguistic barrier?
Please.
Yes. I think the issue of linguistic barrier, it's a real issue that has to be dealt with. And in entering into such partnership, I believe this becomes a risk factor for each of the partnership. Each of the partners in the supposed partnership that is about to happen or is already happening. I have witnessed in some situations where when people stand for their language, especially when it relates to Africa, if they want to stand up for their language, cultural values, and then their religion, then it's misunderstood that they are not accepting. They are not inclusive. But I believe that if the partnership should be fruitful, it should start running on mutual respect for the values each of the partners hold dear. And this is one thing that has to be addressed. And it's a risk for each of the partners. How are you going to communicate effectively? It has to be thought through very well. I think that's my take on it.
Thank you. Carrington, you wanted to?
Yeah, I keep thinking about when people come together, the one language they all understand is music. You have K-pop and you have American music, which are a natural connection. And when people begin to move, they begin to talk and they find ways to communicate otherwise.
That's a good point. And I mean, you look at the K-pop culture and also the K-pop movies. They're there, but they haven't managed to penetrate as much. And this is in Africa, which has Nollywood booming, juxtaposed to Hollywood and other African theaters rising and doing very well. And so that's what I'm saying, like K-pop is there, but it just hasn't been as successful. And when we talk about business, it's all about forming relationships. Once there's a relationship, trust is catered for. We can enter into any contracts. And language has a lot to do with that. And it's always centered around that because that is the biggest obstacle China is facing. It has tried to handle it, but it's just a concern. And again, suggestions are open.
Well, celebrity, if I may, celebrity also is a contribution. People who can speak both languages, who are celebrities in a music environment, as a way to break the bridge in many cases. A lot of the dialogue may take place at a summit or something like that.
And of course, our friend Georges Collinet with Afropop on public radio here in the United States is a good example. Arnold Segoe.
Thank you. I'm Arnold Segoe. I'm an economist with the University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa. I'm also a visiting researcher at Johns Hopkins. Thank you for all the presentations. Really appreciate them. My first question is to the ambassador. Thank you for the history. As many of us history buffs in the economic scene, it was very impressive. Two things though, you mentioned the 800 million US dollars that was actually put forward towards South Korea. This for me sounds like what we call the Marshall Plan after the Second World War. It was passed by Congress here in the US, 13.3 billion US dollars. It was successful, but many argue that its success was only dictated by the fact that the World Bank, as we know it, back then it was, still is, the Bank for Reconstruction and RBRD and development, that they were actually monitoring this very, very actively and doing a lot of evaluation. Now, on the other hand, you do have many African countries that feature on the corruption index on an annual basis. You do have, I'm surprised Professor Bob Wekesa's lights are still on because South Africa is a big problem with the lights. So it's fun. Without monitoring and the institutional capacity, would this be actually a success? That is one question. Then maybe that leads into Professor Sharra, who brings in President Museveni, who has been around in Uganda for 38 staggering years, and the country only made it to middle income status only last year, barely 40% paved roads, and he's been around for 38 years. I know this firsthand. So how do we address or have such people as the poster children for this here summit when they're hardly doing anything with over 35 years worth of experience in power? Thank you.
I think the first question, first of all, good to see you, comrade Arnold Segoe, flying the Witwatersrand flag in DC. I suppose the first question was to Ambassador Kitau and the second one was to Professor Sharra. So maybe, Adam, we could go that way? Yeah.
Please,
sure.
Yeah, sorry. The first question is on governance, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, the Korean situation, and I would like to point out at a very early stage that many African presidents tried to copy the way Park Chung-hee managed Korea during that time of rapid industrialization, and they made a lot of challenges on human rights. Park Chung-hee was a military dictator, and he forced things through, and things worked because of that. Now, you can't do that today, and that goes to the question being raised by Hans about the Sema Undong movement. The conditions, the environment is different. That could work in 60s under a military government, but it will not work today when you are in a democratic country like Kenya or South Africa or any other. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
I think I'll take advantage here, Ambassador Kitau, to weigh in on a question that Hulda Fahmy, raised, which was not, I think, discussed, which was the religious rights. I think Hulda, if I'm getting it correct, there are religious rights, and perhaps one can even place in issues to do with gender-related issues. The definition of gender can be different in various places. I think she posed that question. Yeah. Wonder if you can respond to it.
Oh, religious in what way?
I suppose the question was on the African continent, we have a variety of religions and so forth. And this might not be, there might be different, but maybe let's ask Hulda to ask her own question. It will be better that way, in a sentence, in a word.
Hi.
Hulda?
Oh yeah. So yeah. I just had to unmute. So the question is about, well, specifically freedom to change religion or belief. So because there's countries that have the death penalty for apostasy and blasphemy, but religious freedom, so freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief. How can Korea and African countries work to promote that? Because that's very central for freedom and actually for long-term peace and stability, and also good cooperation and coexistence, to be able to live together with different points of view on, because we have different views on God, and we change beliefs. So how can African countries and Korea, because there's several African countries that have good religious freedom protections, so how can they work together to promote those?
Yeah, okay, let me try, and then maybe Professor Cho will add something. Religion is not an issue in our relationship between Africa and Korea, and especially people from the business background like me. It's not a barrier the way language is, because that question of language has been asked several times, has not been responded to. So if you look at the Koreans in Africa today, 60–70% of the Koreans are missionaries. They are not business people. So already we are working together, and we don't have any obstacle in working together because of religion. Does that answer your question?
Okay, let me tell you about I'm waiting for my turn, because thank you for many people to raising some questions about how South Korean approach to Africa. First of all, in terms of the language, actually in South Korea there is many university actually have a School of Africa, and then those two schools actually have African professors and also Korean professors who studied in Africa. So, and one of my students, PhD students, actually she was conducting the fieldwork in Malawi. She's the expert. She's developing the doctoral thesis about ODA in Malawi, and she is very fluent Swahili. So not many Korean people can speak Swahili, but there is some professors and some university has a program to deal with African literatures, African language, and for myself, I'm teaching African politics. So it is not, many, but, some university have some programs of Africa. So I think that is a kind of starting point. And also I have a student from the Kenya, and actually he come to South Korea from the, Korean missionary to the Kenya. Actually, they help him to support the life cost, and then he right now staying here, and he is doing the master degrees under my guidance. So there is some sharing the culture, and not many Africans actually living in South Korea, but I think I heard that the Nigerian community is the largest as a single country from Africa. So in South Korea, many Africans live in South Korea, and they learn about South Korean histories and culture, etc. And second, I would like to respond to the 새마을 운동. As the Ambassador Kitau mentioned, 새마을 운동 actually originate from the Park Chung-hee. Actually, he is mentioned, he is the dictator, right, military. And the Hans mentioned about, I'm glad that you visited Seoul in 2015. 2015, that the Korean government actually Park Geun-hye, actually she is a daughter of the Park Chung-hee. So she would like to, develop some kind of the ODA model from his father's legend. And I think, Saemaul Undong is just a symbol, showing that because South Korea under the Park Chung-hee regime, we transform from the agricultural society to industrialized society. So Saemaul Undong is kind of the symbol for the people who suffered and people who agriculture society, they can overcome their suffer or the situation to achieving some development. So I think there is no specific strategy, but Saemaul Undong means, it brings some hope for the people who suffered from their lives. So I think, South Korea, I don't believe that, all the African countries, they have a different context and different histories. So I don't think, South Korean people's experience like 1960s and 70s cannot apply to the African context, but the spirit, and you can do. So South Korean people, as you mentioned, we go suffered Korean War and we overcome the underdevelopment. So our experience and our so successful history actually bring it to the African people to have some hope, and then also there is some possibility to achieve and overcome their tough situation. That is what the Saemaul Undong means, I think. Okay.
We're at the end of our allotted time, and I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question. I see there's been a hand raised for some time now. Elena Fowler, if you can unmute and ask your question.
Yes. Hello. My name is Elena Fowler. I work closely with HOLDA with Jubilee Campaign, but I'm of FWM Group, which is a consulting firm that does different things with religious freedom. And just to expand on that, and thank you all for your comments to respond to that in regards to religious freedom and the ambassador, but just giving the long-standing commitment and trade relationship between South Korea and Africa, and then it's essential that we consider both nations will safeguard religious freedoms for the people that migrate, that mitigate the displacement of indigenous communities in Africa as trade and resources and accessibility increase due to government policies. And I just wanted the thoughts on that. And then also, given the historical precedents, particularly countries like Cameroon and Congo, where different companies have come in and investment has increased because of the natural resources that are there, that facilitate corporations' economic increase and moving the processes along. But given the process in which that's done of coercion and misplacement, how does Africa and South Korea plan to work together to protect the African people and make sure they also receive some portion of the economic success that is happening? Because in most cases, what is happening in a number of these countries, where when the economic policies and the government policies invest more in Africa, they take resources out, but don't really give it back to the people in Africa. And majority of the time they are displaced, the indigenous people are displaced, and making these corporations accountable. How is Africa going to make these corporations accountable when this investment increases, and what policies are going to be in place really to help with the religious freedoms of these people, with the individuals that are there on the ground? Because once again, the language barrier, there are many religious cultures in Africa, we know that, and just working within those realms to make sure that this cooperation is done in a way where both countries and both societies flourish, and where one is not left behind and one is prospering and the other one is not, and the other one is assimilating and the other one is making the other one assimilate and the other one is not, making that balance. So it's a long-winded question, maybe for a different time, but I wanted to sort of put that out there because that all relates into religious freedom and how people interact with one another in cooperation and how economic success is achieved. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, and my apologies. For some reason on my screen, I'm not seeing Professor Zengai's hand up, and I'm told by my colleague that his hand has been up for for quite a long time. So Professor Zengai, we can have your question or comment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Powell. My question is simply reiterating some of the professionals who studied development in Africa, people like Kojo Bushwa, Judy Moore, Deborah Bredigan. And their conclusion is investing in infrastructure is one of the major ways to promote development, localized development in Africa. So I was asking, the demonstrated strength of the PRC engagement with Africa is the investment in infrastructure as the driver of sustainable economic development. What is Korea's policy or track record for Africa's infrastructure development, investment in Africa? You talk about trade, you will need electricity, you will need roads, you will need airports, et cetera, et cetera. So what is Korea's policy towards infrastructure development that can facilitate sustainable economic development in Africa?
And that is certainly a central part of China's activity in Africa. So, do we have somebody, Bob, do you want to take that, or one of the other speakers?
I think thanks, Adam. I think I'll defer to Ambassador Kitau or Steve, Sharra, anyone to comment on that, because it looks like it goes in towards almost comparison. But unless my colleagues don't have anything to say, Ambassador Kitau or Steve, Sharra, on the question of infrastructure investment.
And of course, Professor Cho.
I take the questions.
All right, sure. Yeah.
Professor, you want me?
Okay.
Can I comment about infrastructure?
Please.
Okay.
Yeah, you see, infrastructure is big money. And there are very few countries who can handle infrastructure the size of Africa, because China asked the Belt and Road Initiative, and America asked one. Now, Korea formed a company they call KIND in 2018. It means Korea Infrastructure and Urban Development Company, which is about 10 parastatals put together to manage infrastructure in Africa. That company was set up in 2018. The headquarters is in Nairobi. We call it KIND, but since then, it's not been able to conclude a deal in Africa, simply because of the amount of money required. If you take an example of in Kenya, we had one infrastructure deal, the Nairobi-Mombasa highway, super highway. The cost comes to about 3.6 billion, and Korea will not put that kind of money in a single country, because their interest is support at multinational level. So they would rather take that money and give like 20, 30 countries so that they gain favor from those countries. So that has been the challenge when it comes to infrastructure.
Actually, our government tried to help the bilateral relationship, because we invite a lot of the high-ranking leaders to Seoul, and then our president, our high-rank officials to meet directly with the individual countries, the president and prime minister. So it means that, not all African countries have a regular multi-party election, but many of them have a regular elections. So I think the single government can solve all the issues, but African country like Kenya or the South Africa, right now, they have held the multi-party elections, and the people can hold the government accountable. So I think the leaders from the African country to visit the Seoul, and they would like to bring something for their own countries, right? So I think, South Korea also, we achieved the economic development, but we also achieved the democratic consolidations. So I think, we, as a democracy, I think, through the elections, the people who marginalized can also through the election or they can hold their government accountable. So I think there is no targeting the religious freedom, but the democracy itself is very inclusive. So I think South Korea also democracy, we share the democracy with African countries as well. That is also long-term way to serve those religious freedom in Africa, I think. Okay, that is my comment.
Thank you, and we are actually slightly over our allotted time. Bob, do you want to offer any wrap-up comments from the other side of the ocean?
Very quickly to say thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you even more to our, audience. I can see our regular members of the audience. I should single out Primrose because I owe her an explanation over something. This is great, and I think we look forward to the next event. We haven't really covered everything. In fact, I was reflecting right here and wondering, we did quite touch on South Korea's neighbor to the north, which is said to have a big bomb, and it also has, quite some diplomatic presence on the continent. But I suppose we can't really cover everything in one event. We're going to share the report with the colleagues and looking for, I think this helps us going into the summit. And of course, post the summit, we'll come back again to reflect on how it went down. And thank you very much. Over to you, Adam. Right.
Thank you, Bob. And once again, our next forum will be Monday, June 24th, same time, in whatever time zone you happen to be. The topic will be Perspectives from Africa on the Future of International Population and Development Policy. And also in June, you are invited to join us online, virtual only, for a 2-day conference in partnership with the University of Johannesburg and WITS on June 26th and 27th on Africa, artificial intelligence, elections, and the future of democracy. So that is something which is very much a central topic in democracies everywhere. Thank you very much. Some of you saw me trying to queue up a picture here, which I will do after I finish speaking, just to show you, we've been talking about Africa as not one country. There's a photograph which the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs distributed of the planning meeting that they held for the Korea-Africa Summit. And it is a picture showing all of the delegations from Africa in Seoul at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And so you can see quite visually and strikingly that Africa is not one country. But thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to all of our participants who came. And until next time, we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.
I'm not able to. Yes. What about you, sir?
I think you guys actually talked about that 30 hours. Hey, Lisa.
Oh, yeah, not seeing in person, yeah.